Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Immergence Show. Today, we are moving beyond the hype to discuss the foundational architecture for the next era of computing. Forget building another app. We're talking about building the operating system for reality itself. Our guide on this journey is Terry XR, a true industry pioneer who has been shaping technology for 40 years at places like Macromedia and Deutsche Telekom. Over the next hour, we're exploring what it means to build an OS where AI is the brain and XR is the body, how this will change everything from creative work to our own personal growth, and how a new data economy will emerge. This is going to be a deep one, so please get your questions ready, share your thoughts in the comments, and tag a friend who needs to be in this conversation live with us. Let's get started. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. So excited to have you on. I did a brief overview about you, but I would love you to introduce yourself and tell us more about, your career journey.
Sure. So, I started at the age of 12 as a self-taught programmer. Some of the early microcomputers were my first toys, if you will. And I was actually inspired by a PBS show where it showed a lady drawing computer graphics on a monitor. I didn't realize at the time, because this was in the 70s, that the computer cost tens of millions of dollars, and there were two of them in the world. But that inspired me to want, as a comic book fan, want to learn how to become an artist that can work digitally. And I ended up writing some of the earliest paint software for microcomputers as a starting point of learning how to program, and that started my whole journey in computer technology.
That's awesome. And then?
Well, I mean, then, basically, I started a career where I was involved with these sort of paradigm shifts of technology that occurred in the industry. So, in the late 70s, early 80s, the sort of 5-year arc of the growing up of the IBM PC ecosystem. The real drivers at the time were spreadsheets, and VisiCalc and Lotus 1-2-3 were really the things that transformed the computer industry. And so I was a very early alpha and beta user of Lotus 1-2-3, and actually my first startup company was building aftermarket products, spreadsheets that were automated to perform specific tasks. And my career has basically evolved in this sort of set of 5-year arcs, with spreadsheets in the first half of the 80s, and then microcomputer databases in the second half of the 80s, as we look to have more complex data sets coming from mainframe and mini computers down to a microcomputer desktop level. And that's actually when I started my journey with AI in 1985. In parallel to microcomputer databases, I saw AI tools as a way to take that data and mine it for more interesting information, and also to enable people to do things that they wouldn't have the domain expertise to do. And so I was involved in some of the very first commercial software products for PCs that enabled people to build their own AI software applications. Expert systems is what we called them at the time. Then I moved into multimedia in the early 90s. So from 90 to 95 was sort of this 5-year arc of multimedia and CD-ROMs, and the advent of having more complex media types intermixed together to let people communicate knowledge and information and experiences. And I was involved with the design of a product called Macromedia Director, which was really the dominant multimedia authoring tool for probably a decade, along with Flash. And then the mid 90s, we saw the advent of the internet. And so this was when we started to transition from these cheap 680, megabyte delivery vehicles of CD-ROMs to, hey, we could have all of this data on the internet. We can stream it to the user's computer. And I actually invented the hybrid idea of having CDs that were interconnected to the internet, commercialized tools that enabled people to build those kinds of applications, and then really focus on this transition of multimedia experiences onto the internet, rich internet applications, and sort of shockwave and flash and all the things that sort of drove a richer web experience over just images and text. And then that moved into, I moved out of the software industry into cellular communications technology in the early 2000s. It was the mobile phone and the cellular connectivity and the ability for everybody to talk to each other, in a moment's notice. And so for the first half of the 2000s was about, consumer electronics and mobile phone technology. And then I transitioned from there into social media platforms. So 2005 to 2010 is really the explosion of social media platforms and the context of that. And my career has basically sort of been in these 5-year arcs. Today, we're in this 5-year arc of AI and AI plus XR, I think really is really where we're going to be focusing, or I'll be focusing my time. But AI in general, of course, is really the next 5 years is going to be the explosion, the big bang, if you will.
Wow, such a fascinating journey. And there's so much more to talk about. Thank you so much for that. Before we get into the conversation, I want to say hi to everyone who is joining us live. Please comment, share your thoughts, ask questions, and tag your friends. Hi, Karen, Marilyn, Ian, Alexander, and everyone else. Feel free to comment and we'll get to your questions. Awesome. So I'm curious, Terry, what are some of the lessons that you learned along the way? Maybe more specific to, the AI and XR combination and how we think that they are two essential halves of this computing future.
Well, it's really interesting for me in the 80s, using products like Microsoft Word and Excel and productivity tools. These products evolved for decades on creating more complex user experiences with more features, right? And actually, back in that time when we shipped physical products with printed manuals in boxes and put them on shelves in a store, some people might remember Egghead software, whatever. The size of the box had to increase as a way of competitively elbowing out other companies, right? And so we saw, more and more ribbons with more and more features, and the software became more and more complex. What I found in my journey is, and sort of been my credo, which is making software simpler for users rather than trying to make users smarter for software. And so that credo has been, a real baseline for why I always look to leverage AI as a way to enable a more convenient user experience. And with XR, where we're trying to create, for the most part, real world first experiences, which are digitally enhanced with overlay of information and stuff, we start to realize that a lot of cases, cognitive overload becomes an issue. So, if you put more than 3 pieces of information in front of the user at a given moment, it creates a distraction rather than a benefit from the real world, and maybe even danger, depending on the context, like driving a car. So for me, the journey has been, I want more sophisticated software, but I want to design it for users in a way that can allow them to not be cognitively overloaded, to learn how to use and benefit from the software, and to incrementally lean in more and more over time, and have really ultimately have the software personalize its experience for that particular user. Some software designers have created sort of novice versus expert mode interfaces, especially as they get really complex, Illustrator, Unity, whatever. Products that take months and months and months of onboarding time to get really familiar with them. And I think that helps. And I see, some of the convenience of having like AI, help me do this kind of inputs into these complex products. But that doesn't really completely solve for the user experience problem of, I've got this app with like tons of UI functions and I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. I have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't know how to translate the intent of my idea to action in the application. And I think this is really what's going to happen. There's companies working to build pipelines to enable users to have a conversational experience with an app they've never seen before, and to drive that app to an outcome that makes sense to them, without knowing about how these features work, without becoming a domain expert. And I think this is really the learning curve for me as a software designer, is really wanting to lean into that kind of experience as much as possible.
Love it. You shared so many great points. And to the point of talking about simplifying the process for the user, that reminded me of what Perplexity founder mentioned, how at some point we were thinking we have to learn how to prompt, but eventually we realized like the good AI LLM should be easy to prompt, and no one needs to become an expert to talk to these. And that is a really good point. And then the user experience part you mentioned, it's so important for adoption. We saw the same thing with Web3. We're seeing it with XR. And a lot of times I think engineers just forget that, the person who is going to use it is, not a sophisticated user. So
Right.
very good points. Thank you for sharing. And thanks to our amazing audience who are joining us live. Feel free to add any questions or comments. And Merlin is adding some good comments. The next disruption won't be hardware or software. It will be values that tech is forced to embody. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I'm curious about this aspect that you mentioned, real world first, digital second philosophy. Anything else you want to add to that? Like what would be an example of that?
Well, look, I mean, if you look at real world experiences, that a lot of let's put it this way, a lot of XR use cases tend to be indoor driven, right? That's typically
Yeah.
based on the reality of the hardware. If you're using VR headset with pass through, you're indoors,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking. If you're using lightweight AR glasses, generally you're indoors because the brightness of the outside light, sun, can make it really difficult to actually see the experience digitally, right? So, and some products even tell you don't use these products outdoors because of that. Now we're solving for that on a technical level with glasses that have brighter displays, more nits to the eye. But what I think is really driving a lot of success is the advent of AI glasses, where I don't really need a display. What I need is a really good AI enabled experience with
Right.
camera and microphone that really work, and then audio to me as feedback from the AI that I can really hear in pretty much any context. And I think as people lean into this, what we see is lightweight, all-day wearable products don't have to be products that deliver time durative use cases. I'm not going to put the glasses on and sit for an hour and have a long conversation. What I'm going to have is moment to moment experiences throughout my day. And I'm going to need a little piece of information. I'm going to have a question, a search inquiry. What is that? How much is this have in terms of calories or whatever? And those little moment to moment experiences are very similar to wearing an Apple Watch, right? When you wear an Apple Watch, you glance at the watch. It's a 5 to 15-second interaction where I'm glancing to see what's today's weather, what time is it, how many steps have I taken. When I want to interact with that data set, go a little deeper, it's called a complication on the Apple Watch. That's a 15 to 30-second interaction, a little bit deeper, where I'm going to look and maybe scroll through what's the weather forecast for the next few days. So when we translate that to a head-worn experience, I think that use cases where I'm out and about, like I'm traveling in a city that I'm on vacation in, and I don't really have enough context for the place
Right.
that I'm going. I want to explore, but I also want to be comfortable. Maybe I don't know the language. Maybe I don't know which restaurants have what kind of food. I don't know how to get from one place to another. I don't know where the museums are. So all of those sort of little tidbits are great examples of a use case where outdoor experiences with moment to moment utilization of AI or AI and AR can really be powerful. And ultimately, what we're striving for is just like these glasses, where I put them on in the morning without thinking, and then I take them off at the end of the day. Um, AI or AI plus AR glasses will enable that sort of automatic usability and convenience of enhancing my real world experience with the digital content.
Love it. That so basically that augmented intelligence concept
Right.
rather than artificial intelligence, because it's not that artificial.
Yeah.
So I love that
Yeah.
explanation. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. So I'm curious about, how do you see the role of human in all of this? I know we briefly talked about it before, is that you see human as a creative director of all of this. Again, if you can give us an example or walk us through how you see this kind of AI working with the human side.
Well, I mean, the reason I refer to it as the era of augmented intelligence is because what we're getting from AI right now is acceleration and polish, right? We start with a premise that we have a certain task that we want to do, a piece of information that we want to gather, an image that we want to create, whatever. And we're letting AI, LLMs, reasoning models, and the subtools that they're leveraging to speed us up, right? We still have to be the instigator of the idea. I need this, I want that, make this. But ultimately, the AI is just a worker that's doing that job faster and smarter than ever before. And so I still have the responsibility to have the idea, and I still have the responsibility to quality control the outcome from the AI to deliver ultimately my end product. And what's really powerful is that because AI is so much of an accelerator in getting from an intent to an outcome, that we can iterate more often. We can do more what if scenarios. We can try tweaking and variants without the investment of time that we would have had in the past. So now, let's say that AI is 10x faster at doing creative writing, image generation, whatever. I can now do 10 iterations instead of one in the same time. And when you do iterations on ideas that you have, you tend to end up with a much better result. That's the polishing phase, right? Iteration results in polish, or exploration and surprise. Because sometimes you get surprised with the results. You go, I didn't think of that. Let's go down the path of that. And so for me right now, that's where AI sits, because AI is reactive right now. AI waits for you. You provide the input, and then it reacts to that and provides some results. It's going to change very quickly, though. And I think the really interesting era we're about to enter is proactive AI. This is where AI, with personalization, with context, with constraints, permissions that you've given it, can watch and listen and learn, and then proactively inject digital content into your life. And it can be a whole bunch of things. We start with agentic systems where you set up an agent to perform a certain set of tasks. And that's almost like the old school day of like Apple script and having scripts that watch folders. And whenever you put files in a folder, it automatically generates a whole bunch of processes on those files, right? Same sort of idea, except now we can apply it to like a much more holistic viewpoint rather than just some files in a folder, where we're now having the agentic system operate on complex series of tasks, not just make an image, search some data, but like a whole bunch of things. And the outcome can be much more sophisticated. Like, here's an entire PowerPoint presentation. Here's a book, here's a movie. And so the outcome can be much more compounded, but the human still has to be the one that creates the guidelines, the rails, the personalization mechanisms to guide the outcome to a certain style, a certain intent. And so we still have a responsibility in the loop. What we're allowing AI to do is take some of the dirty work, the tedious work, and do that for us really fast so that we can be more creative and more iterative in our thinking.
Love it. And we had so many good comments about what you were sharing, that, it actually accelerates our creativity. And sometimes even related to image and video generation, we see AI hallucination is some level of creativity too, that maybe we didn't even think about. So it's not always a bug. Sometimes it could be a good feature.
That's awesome. Right.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
There's a reason why 6 fingers in the video can be funny.
Yes. And sometimes it's good for virality because people post about it and share it and all that.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about AI Companion. I know you've been using them. You're one of the early adopters, and you've been using it in your personal life as well. So if you can share a little bit about us. Merlin is also mentioning the most powerful device isn't in your pockets. So we'd love to hear what your experience has been.
Sure. So my responsibility at Deutsche Telekom is to focus on next generation devices. So I've been for the last several years the headset guy, the AR glasses guy, or XR guy at Deutsche Telekom. But currently, I'm kind of focusing more broadly on any kind of wearable. And my thesis for this is that AI, these devices are just surfaces for AI. That's really where we're going. Like at some point, the hardware tech gets commoditized, and then the real differential is on the software stack that's driving the experience and the outcome on the back end. And so in terms of AI scribes or companions, so AI scribes are products that are note takers, like the Plod Note Pen, or Limitless Pendant, or Bee Pioneer. And so I've been testing a whole swath of these kinds of products, Omi, Friendly, I mean, there's just lots. And really looking not so much on the hardware, but on the software in terms of what does it benefit me to record everything that I say, or conversations that I have, and what are the guardrails that I want to put into place, and what are the benefits. And so what was really interesting to me is, AI scribes are products that basically just do super accurate transcripts, then create summarizations and action item recommendations and follow-ups, and agentically can also start to drive other tools. Like, if you have a meeting with somebody and you promise a document to be sent to them after the meeting, then maybe the agentic tool can go into your files and, with your permission, of course, email a particular document automatically to the person you were talking to, so you don't have to remember to do all that. And that's really great. And the tools, like I said, Plot is a really good example, really powerful, really high quality. But where it got really interesting to me was this idea that if I have a recording of conversations, when I go back and look at those conversations, I tend to see personal facts that I disclose to other people, anecdotes that I share about my life, because I like to refer to things with anecdotes as a way of empathetically grounding what I'm talking about to other people. I've shared some today, right? Talking about my initial reason for becoming a programmer. And so these become really interesting because then you can start to, within your own space, ask questions about this data set, or get insights from this data set. And so I treat those devices that have software that enables you to do that, AI companions versus AI scribes, because as companions, they're right now reactively allowing you to ask questions that are very interesting. For example, one of the questions I asked was, what should I go shopping for next week for groceries? Now, that could be a very simple thing where, it's looking at like, what did you shop for last week? I'll just give you the same list again. But now it's actually able to do things like it knows that I'm going to be on a business trip next week, and I'm going to be traveling on an airplane. I'm going to be at a conference. And so it makes some recommendations about what would be healthy snacks to pack in my backpack to take with me into the conference. And, also knows where I like to shop, and maybe could even agentically at some point go off and look for what's on sale and make recommendations, based on that. That's one that's kind of obvious, but here's one that's not obvious. I literally asked the question because I had conversations on the phone with my children. I have 3 adult sons. And I talked about my children with other people, my partner. And then I asked an AI companion, how could I be a better father to my children? And it was able to produce a child by child reference, your son Josh, da, 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 your son Jordan, da, da, da. And it had insights into things that they've said, things I've said about them, things that we said to each other, that gave me guidance on some improvements, some opportunities to be a better parent. And that's kind of shocking stuff. That's very personal. Obviously not stuff you want to share with other people, but also stuff that maybe you couldn't get from anybody else. Like, even as objectively as they may try to, they may not be able to give you that insight as holistically as you would get from this kind of a data set. So to me, that's a really powerful thing. And then you can also ask questions like, how can I have a better work-life balance? Or do I have a good work-life balance? And so forth. So this idea of companionship, where the AI is using your data with your control, with your guidance and your inquiry to give you insights into your own life, very, very powerful tool for self-improvement or for just making good decisions. And when we put proactive AI agency into this, then it gets really interesting, right? Because it could even be like a coach that while I'm having a conversation with one of my sons, could in my ear quietly say, "Hey, don't forget," or maybe you want to slow down your speed of, or your change your tone, or like it could be really empathetic intelligence that kind of leans in and kind of gives you a little tap on the shoulder. And so I think that is where things get really exciting.
That's awesome. And I love how you're talking about it very optimistically. And I do have some questions about data privacy when it gets to these companions. Yeah. But before that, let's get into a question from the audience. And Marius is asking, Marius, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If AI become sentient, would reality and cognition be driven by humans, by AI, or by a symbiosis of these two?
It's a great question. I think that the concept of sentience is, a complicated one, and people have different POVs about what does that really mean, and what is the difference between AGI and super AGI and all of this. Look, I mean, if you were to take a certain age person, a certain person from a certain era, and put them in front of, what's available today in terms of like, high quality, uncanny valley crossing AI avatars that I could have a natural conversation with. I mean, we're like Turing tests kind of, beating kind of experiences are already there. So I think ultimately the decision to that, or the answer to that question, is going to be driven by humans. What are we willing to do? We start with controlling this. We're almost over-regulating in some cases the use of AI to ensure some guardrails, right? Because otherwise, unfortunately, it can go off the rails, and we have to, work very carefully to make sure that we are mindful and protective of our own species with the way that we use these technologies. But at some point, it will probably be a symbiosis, because there will be automated systems that will make decisions. And there already are a lot of those, but there will be more and more lean in that will occur as trust and safety issues have been addressed. So the key is we have to start by building trust that the AI and the companies and services that are operating under the concept of AI are safe and trustable, and that our data is protected, and that we have the right to control whether our data is utilized or not, and what's the scope of that utilization. Once we build trust, then we lean in more. And a good example I like to use is camera phones. So when camera phones first came out, people will go to a bar or a restaurant, and there'll be a sign on the wall as you walked in that says no camera phones, because there was a lack of trust that somebody with a phone that could take a picture would do the right thing with the picture taking. But that's really not an AI issue. That's a human psychological issue with, what are you doing with those pictures? And, do I want you to take a picture of me? And I think, when was the last time you saw that sign on a restaurant or a bar or a club? Or, you don't see it, right? Because the use of this technology became trusted and ubiquitous sort of expectation of an allowance for it. Now it's really about, are you within a meter of my face with your smartphone camera pointing at me? Because if you're less than a meter, then you might be like violating my personal space, and now I'm not so trusting anymore. So I think the same journey will occur with AI, where we will start to learn, how far we can trust it, and there'll be downsides. There'll be moments where the trust will be broken and we'll have to rebuild. But I think ultimately, we'll see a positive mindset build over time. There will be people who will not ever trust AI, and I like to call them the Luddites of AI. You refer to them as the Amish of AI in a prior conversation. I definitely think that there's going to be people who, the same way there are people that live completely off the grid right now. There's no, they're air gapped. They're not connected to the internet. They live off their own land. That's just the reality. But I think that there will be probably a larger proportion of society that will be anti-AI than there might be in terms of like anti-internet or anti-government or anti-whatever. And so I definitely think it's going to be a more impactful thing, because it touches people more broadly.
Right. Yeah, I love talking about this data paradox, and we have talked about it on our show before. I would love to get your take on how do you think this can be done in a fair way to make sure that at least we're addressing the concerns for the majority of the population, maybe not everyone.
Well, we start with, the government regulatory approaches, right? GDPR, HIPAA, the EU AI Act, which just kicked in on August 2nd, um, and so forth, right? And so there's, a lot of constraints being put into place to make sure that people are protected, specifically around personal identifiable information. That's really the crux of the matter. Um,
Yep.
and then, and certainly products that are AI scribes or AI companions have to really lean in on addressing those regulatory requirements because they're the ones they're really, live blogging, everything you say and what people around you say.
Mm-hmm.
I think ethics is really important. I'm a co-founder of the XR Guild, which is focused on ethics in the XR community, which crosses over into AI. I co-wrote a big part of our corporate ethics policy on AI several years ago, and so I am a strong believer that we have to have not just government regulation, but corporate ethical policies and even societal ethical policies when it comes to the use of AI and personal data. Um, I think that there's an interesting benefit of social media platforms where people have embraced the reality the algorithm is there, taking their personal data and manipulating digital reality for them based on that. Um, and there's been some backlash, of course, some pretty well-known, Netflix shows and things like that. I think that created a learning curve for us. And I believe that people are very much in the mindset of having self-sovereign identity management and the ability to control what personal information can happen. So we started with, in the 80s, it was a shrink wrap license called the EULA, an end user license agreement. It was a printed legal document that was wrapped around the box under the shrink wrap and a sticker on the shrink wrap that said, when you tear open the shrink wrap, you accept the agreement inside, but you can't read the agreement inside, right? So then we went from that to in the 90s and early 2000s, checkboxes that said, I accept your terms and conditions, and then log in. And so you didn't read those, and it became a running joke. The iTunes terms and conditions, right, was the classic example. I have a 55-page comic book based on that, by the way. That's somebody
Wow.
created because that's how funny it is, right? So we've muscled memory this idea that we're going to just accept whatever those policies are blindly. But now people are not so willing to do that. And, with web browsers having like cookies and, it creates a way for users to control what part of the data set that they're sharing can be accessed by the vendor of the website. But that's still not good enough because it's not easy to revoke that data permission. And it's also hard to sort of see it in aggregate across all the platforms you use. It's impossible. So what I think are moving towards is more user-centric situation where I decide and I have a clear sort of contract that you adopt, and in many ways it's sort of like a blockchain kind of contract, where I say this is the metadata about me that I'm giving you permission to use, and in exchange you clearly tell me why I'm doing that. What is the value proposition of my giving you that data? What do I get back? So I understand the quid pro quo, and I think we're sliding into that context, and ultimately I do think that it'll also become a marketplace, because if users get control back of their data, vendors still need to have access to that data. And so they will pay for it because it's worth something to them. And so then I think there's an opportunity that will migrate into where users can monetize their personal data in a pool situation. And it'll be platforms which will monetize for an aggregate of users to an aggregate of vendors who want to have access to that. In many ways, it kind of is almost like mailing lists back in the day, right? Where you would have a mailing list, it would be a company that would sell the rights to use that mailing list to multiple vendors so they can market their products and stuff like that. They're the ones that made the money. Now we need to pay the users. Now we have the systems in place to do microtransactions and pay people, incrementally for their data. So I think that'll happen at some point.
Very good point. And Yes, microtransactions, but also with AI, we can do personalization at scale that maybe was harder before. So regarding those terms that you mentioned, it makes sense. We had actually Doc Searles, the author of Intention Economy. He's working on my terms with IEEE, and similar concept. We need to have more of a proactive role into what is put in front of us and what we sign, and I agree. Very good points. Thank you for that. We do have a question from Marius. How are identity, agency, and ownership all impacted in a space where AI co-authors the co-shared world experience?
Okay, that's a complex question. AI, so the assumption is AI is co-authoring the co-shared world experience. So I think that at some point humans have to set the guardrails for this. For example, we're in a world right now, we're in a time right now where we're allowing AI to create procedurally generated worlds, right? The idea of the metaverse, these personalized spaces, is transitioning from I build it myself, like Minecraft or other sort of metaverse platforms, Horizon Worlds, where I'm hand building all this stuff, to I just want you to give me a wild western scene. I want a saloon. I want 3 poker tables, chairs along the bar for 12 people, and then I just go in there with my friends and we hang out. But I still need to set the parameters under which that operates. Are conversations private? Do we capture anything? What are the rules as it relates to this environmental thing? I don't think that we're at a point right now we're gonna let AI just blindly author these shared experiences. I think we still will be the ideators. What do we want? How do we want to experience that? What are the rules associated with the environment? In terms of like either like age, social integrations, language, use of language, not safe for work, like all those sort of parameters have to be decided by the human, not the AI. So I think one of the things that I've been involved with is the creation of the Metaverse Standards Forum, and one of the real purposes there was to really focus on an open standards for the metaverse, and identity and the ability to take my identity and move it across ecosystems and move it across metaverse platforms was a really big motivator for us even starting the initiative we called Meta Traversal, which sort of instigated the creation of the Metaverse Standards Forum. And in that context, letting people decide what their clothing looks like and trying to bring that across to different ecosystems was a big part of it. Because if I'm going to buy an NFT with a really cool pair of shoes, I want to be able to wear those shoes not just in one platform but several. So I think this idea of like the personal agency, the personal identity, is something that will come as a sort of non-siloed experience, multi-vendor. Now there will be wall garden environments where they may say, well, you can bring your NFTs in, but you can't wear the penis hat because it's a Disney platform and we don't allow that. So there will be, these sort of constraints that will be provided by the environment. The same way as if I build a procedurally generated, saloon, then I'll say, well, you have to wear you can't wear baseball uniforms because we want it to feel thematically correct to the environment. So your identity should, match the vibe, right? So that it gets kind of nuanced, but also really interesting and fun.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing. And thanks for the great questions, everyone. I love the conversation about AI, but I know XR is a huge aspect of your background and experiences, and you've been in there since the 90s, long before the metaverse hype that brought a lot of people into it. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts about this OS for reality, this principle, and also like, what are some of the examples that you think make sense that XR is, merged to our lives? You talked about, AI being, part of our day-to-day lives, but how about XR?
So there's a lot to this, but let's start with the way I perceive operating systems, which is I believe that operating systems are the sediment of software. And what I mean by sediment is, sediment is, as things settle down, lower and lower within, into the crust of the earth, of the mantle of the earth, I should say. So my, if you look at the way software has evolved over decades, we start with sort of like a high level function within an application, a user feature, and eventually that migrates down into a framework that the application's built on. And then that migrates down into the operating system level. And then it migrates down even further into the microcode of the processor, because it becomes sort of core functionality that people want to rely on. And so I've seen software evolve like this over many, many decades. And I think we're kind of at this place where that's going to happen for a variety of reasons with AI, certainly with LLMs and reasoning models and a lot of the subtools. Now, there's some non-obvious reasons why that would happen, but some very obvious reasons, one of which is cost, right? Operating costs to operate these things in the cloud is expensive. And if you run these services on device as part of the operating system, then the cost goes down significantly, right? And so this is a very important thing. Also, it becomes more performant because it's running on device. So the latency issues that we have to deal with, especially in certain types of real-time experiences, require on-device operation. But we also have battery, compute per watt issues that we have to address with XR headsets. To go from a headset, which is basically something that weighs more than 50 grams, that's bulky on your head, to glasses 50 grams or less, we have to solve for battery and compute. And in that context, we have a need to have a balance, but sort of hybrid compute model with like your local your phone that you have connected to your headset, maybe wirelessly, maybe plugged into the USB-C port, is providing some of that edge compute functionality locally, so that the glasses can be lightweight and not require as much power. And so this is really a big forcing function on the evolution of integrating AI into the operating system level. But then there's also just sort of natural things, like we start to integrate the dependency on the AI into the function of the operating system. How does the operating system work in deciding how an application loads, unloads, manages memory? How does the operating system work in terms of the frameworks that it supports to manage certain functions, right? If we look at the Android OS and all the APIs, or iOS APIs, there's a lot of APIs there, a lot of power at that level that developers lean into to utilize. But right now, we're just starting to see the beginnings of those API frameworks leaning into underlying AI technology. And as that happens more and more, for example, if you have an LLM that's completely cross-connected underneath all of the APIs, then you can start to lean in the benefits of that. Always having a conversational UI on every app. We see an interesting example of that is real-time translation being integrated into the iOS 26 APIs. So every app that utilizes the standard APIs, SharePlay and whatever, for streaming audio and video can also benefit from real-time translation functions. So that's a great example where the AI tooling is being integrated at the OS level, enabling all users to have a real-time multilingual communication. Now, this is really important. As an operator, our number one job is to enable person A to talk to person B with as little friction as possible. Latency, performance, quality of sound. But then we start looking at language, right? Especially for a European operator, we have customers that speak dozens of languages. This becomes an interesting use case. And so for me, that's a really great example of benefiting everybody at the OS level to enable convenience of communication, leveraging AI and real-time translation and tooling to make that possible. To me, that's a really strong use case example.
Love it. Thank you for sharing. That definitely resonates with many. And Felipe is asking, as someone who evaluates next-gen devices, what is the biggest hardware or sensor bottleneck right now that once solved will unlock the true potential of an embodied AI?
Okay, well, so here's where we get into my Star Trek story. So look, if you think about most AI wearables, the core sensors are camera and microphone, because that's capturing the context of the real world for the user. And we've done a pretty good job, I think, in really achieving quite outstanding results with microphone and camera today. There's still some miniaturization work. There's still some improvements in battery to be squeezed out, but generally speaking, they're pretty darn good. So where do we go from there? Well, of course, we can have physiological sensors like you get in smart rings, which are tracking, quite a variety of body measurements, and we have that in the Apple Watch, and there's all the sensor arrays of those devices, which is really good for health and fitness use cases, absolutely. But more broadly, I think where it gets really interesting is BCI. So for several years, I've been focused on the brain control interface ecosystem and trying out devices in that context. And where I think things are going to change. So if you think about LLMs today, they're able to take, you kind of brought this up earlier, Nico, which is that we don't have to be super linguistically correct. I still pride myself in spelling correctly and using grammatically correct sentences when I'm prompting an AI, but we don't need to. You can write, I've seen terrible typos with words that are joined together with a random letter. I hit the space bar, I hit a V instead. And it still completely understands the context. I use the word calling, or I use the word calling instead of calling when I was telling an AI about some 3D stuff I wanted to do. It totally understood the context, right? So if you think about text messages, in terms of like Gen A text messaging, where they use like short, sort of short word, acronymic kind of messaging that most people can't understand at all because they don't have context generationally, AIs can handle that. So I bring it up because where I think BCI is going to really change the game is when I can go from thought to text. And what I don't need is prosody of like 90 words per minute, where it's a perfect, like brain signal being translated into grammatically correct sentences that are fed into an LLM to then perform tasks. What I need is symbology. So for example, if I could have a BCI device where I could say, I could think out desire, coffee, and hot in any combination contextually, and if I could send those three symbols into an LLM and give it the context that I'm in a Starbucks because it can GPS look me up, then it could even know what kind of coffees I like and say, well, he wants a mocha, grande, hot. And so it could tell the other person, that it could feed that into a system. So I think when we look at conversational UI, us talking to AIs through our voice instead of through typing. I use a software application called Whisper Flow, which has changed my life because I'm 10 times more productive with text messaging, writing code. I don't type anywhere near as much as I used to because I just literally hold the function key down on my computer and talk to my AI IDEs, talk to my email application, and write out with much better quality than Siri ever had, what I want to achieve. So if I could take that same thing and do that with a BCI device that, however it operates, whether it's using brainwave signals or grabbing, subvocalization off of, my jawline or whatever, and I don't have to speak out loud. Now we solve for privacy concerns because now I can communicate with an AI without talking out loud in front of other people. And the contextual use of that is powerful. I can be in a meeting. I can ask for some research to be gathered on the fly. So instead of just having proactive AI, I can lean into a reactive AI situation. I can sub-vocalize or even think some things. I could even say, email the blah, blah, blah document to Fred right now. And I could think that and have it do that while I stay focused on my engagement with other people. So BCI, I think, is really going to be a game changer. And we're not far away from, I know it sounds like Star Trek and science fiction, but look, I mean, the only thing we haven't done, I think, in Star Trek, it actually created so far was the matter transporter. So, I mean, everything else that was in Star Trek exists. So I think ultimately we are probably a couple years away. And if we combine the functionality of that with XR devices, it's a game changer, because now I can just look around. I don't have to be constantly talking out loud. I don't have to take away from what I'm doing, and it's completely private and secure. Now, this is one way. This is my thought to action, not somebody injecting thoughts into my brain, reading my mind, or anything like that. So I want to be really clear. I don't think we're going down that path. I think we're going down that path of enablement. First, for people who literally can't speak, can't communicate in the normal way with their voice, and then to enable all of us to have private, quiet interaction with devices. It'll be really interesting to see.
It's great that you clarified, because as soon as you said BCI, my mind went to like putting a chip in our brain. But that's actually the scary parts. And then
yeah, but this is, I want to be clear. When I talk about BCI, I'm talking about non-invasive devices. So there's a company called Emotive, for example, that has basically just earbuds, wired earbuds, that, and actually they're wireless ones now, that just came out with, and these can sense your brain waves well enough, again, non-invasively, no sticking needles or jack in the back of your head or anything like that. I don't believe that we need to have invasive BCI to deliver these use cases.
And only read, not write.
That's correct.
That's
no, the other way around. You're writing, it doesn't read.
Yeah.
Your brain is writing outcome. Yeah.
Exactly, but yeah, not the way that maybe Meta wants to do.
Wow.
All right, that is a very good one. And then you talked about kind of like the future. So I think what's very unique about you is that you're very much focused on this near-term future, the 18 to 24 month window, and it's very practical. So I would love you to share a little bit about what kind of tangible milestones in AI and XR we should all kind of keep an eye for, and what would give us the signal that this integrated OS is becoming viable?
So I think on the AI glasses side, right, which I mentioned, creates this nice balance between form factor and function. So I can put them on all day. I've worn, for example, the new Meta Oakley HSTNs for days at a time. So comfort's really important. Weight, fashion, these things become very important, but you also need function. And I think we're at a point where there's a number of vendors coming to the table over the next 3 to 6 months. Between now and CES in January, you're going to see a bunch of products that are AI glasses that are really lightweight, that are in the 40-gram area, that provide really high quality microphone and speaker arrays, and some with camera. Most without display, but that's okay, because again, they accommodate giving users a lot of value without compromising on the form and the fashion. I believe that in 6 months we'll start to see announcements and really solid versions of AR glass versions of AI glasses. So AI plus AR, where we're going to bring a display, but it's going to be a simple display. It's not going to be always the kind of displays where we have binocular, color wide field of view type devices that we're used to from companies like XReal or Viture, but more monochromatic displays, or simple, smaller field of view color displays, which just add enough visual information to supplement the oral feedback that you're getting. So it's multimodal input and multimodal output to the user. So we'll be on a journey next year where you're going to see these devices coming to the table. Some are going to be pretty expensive. I would say probably in the $800 to $1,000 range. But again, as we work incrementally to solve for physics and battery and compute, and where does the compute load get shifted to, we'll see these products come down in price, probably in around the $600 range. And then we start getting some game-changing experiences, because when we have display, then the use cases broaden significantly. I don't want oral navigation. I want a little bit of a visual cue to turn right in 40 feet and all that stuff that we use our mobile phone for. So if I can keep the phone in the pocket and use the glasses, moment-to-moment flows of interaction, the phone gets leveraged as a compute and connectivity and battery device, but also for durative use cases where I need to spend more than a few seconds. And so the devices use cases split, which is what they should do, between the moment-to-moment stuff up here and the more time derivative stuff in the phone or tablet for computer. And so I think that as we get to the end of 2026, so about 18 months from now, this will now be AI glasses Gen 3 or second gen of glasses with display. And now we'll start to kind of, in an ironic way, we'll kind of go back to what we had probably 3 or 4 years ago with like X-Real errors or whatever, which will be a wider field of view capable device, so I'm not compromising so much on the digital display, and still keeping the balance of form and fashion in play. So that's how I see that working. Now, on the software side, we're going to see a variety of things. We see some interesting open source movements. Brilliant Labs just announced their new second version of their open source initiative a few days ago. There's the Augment OS initiative, which multiple vendors are working with as an open source platform for an AI-enabled XR operating system. And I think there'll be more competition with Android XR coming into the table, where multiple vendors can lean in there and leverage the benefits of Android XR across multiple devices, which is really an important thing because we've been living in a very siloed ecosystem where I can only build for one device at a time. The other interesting thing is, and I've been proving this out with AI IDEs, is that I can actually build a native application for one device, like a Swift app that runs on Apple Vision Pro, and I can completely reimagine that as a native Android XR device for Samsung Muhan or something, and lean into the unique value proposition of the hardware without compromising on coding, right? So I spent 30 years writing single source code that operates across multiple platforms, but now it's more about single source ideation that I can then use the AI agents to build the unique expression of that idea onto a specific platform, so we can solve for the silo problems this way. And I think that is also going to happen over the next 18 months.
So that's the interoperability that we talked about a lot in Metaverse Web space. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a way of driving it over the top, right? Because I don't have to care if Apple and Google don't want to work together. I can, and I don't have to compromise by using, Unity and AR Foundation to try to, sort of have a common denominator application that can run on both. I can just go and build it straight out the native way for all the features of the particular device. And I think that's a big game changer from what we're used to doing.
Love it. And as we're approaching towards the end, if I can get a more brief answer.
Sure.
Looking beyond this 24 months horizon, what is your boldest, most out there prediction for what this OS for reality will enable us in the next 5 years?
I think the functionality of what we see with Lovable, Windsurf, and Cursor will become operating system functions. Again, settling down. And this kind of talks to the earlier question about AI authored or co-authored. I think here we'll create disposable software based on the capabilities of the operating system to spawn an application that runs natively that delivers exactly what you want. So instead of taking an application like a productivity tool like Excel and trying to formulate a specific spreadsheet use case, I will simply describe the use case for a spreadsheet, and it will build an app that does exactly that for me. And then I can iterate on it. And so this will happen a lot. I think for XR, it'll be very important to be able to spawn a cognitively non-overloading user experience that perfectly fits the personalization requirements of function that the user has on the fly in the moment. And it won't have to be something that's pre-authored. It'll be literally created on the fly. And I believe that strongly will happen within 3 to 5 years.
Wow. Thank you so much. This was such an insightful conversation. I had a lot more questions, but our time is limited. So I appreciate you so much and our amazing audience. But what would be next for you, Terry? How can people support you throughout your journey, and where can they find you?
Well, so on the top of my LinkedIn profile, I have a link to a WhatsApp channel. I'm feeding just news. It's not a community or conversation, but it's just high quality news where I'm sharing insights and interesting information. So I definitely recommend people to subscribe to that. It's all signal, no noise. And really, I try to be insightful and thoughtful about what I post there, including posting about this event today. And basically, I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit called the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences. It's academyimmersive.org. We definitely recommend people to go check that out. It's a totally nonprofit focused on trying to share knowledge. So our focus is to educate, inspire, and recognize the good work of other people in the XR industry. We run a lot of initiatives from charity programs like Ready Player Golf, where we annually raise money for things like children's cancer research, to podcast type of activities, and we're working on some really interesting knowledge bases to share knowledge about how to get ahead with all of these tech stacks that are changing so rapidly. So please go visit the Academy website.
Thank you so much. And I can definitely support that. WhatsApp group is great. And yeah, we can't wait to see what's next for T-Mobile and all the amazing work that you're doing. And our audience had been asking a lot of questions and comments. So Terry, if you ever had the chance to go and read those comments and answer, that would be great after the show. And thanks again to everyone who joined us live, commented, engaged: Marius, Casey, Marilyn, Ian, Ritika, Felipe, Jean, everyone who was joining us live or will be watching the recording. We're so grateful for you. Join us back next week on Tuesday at 12 p.m. EST. Thank you so much again, Terry. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Bye. And I will answer the